Hey everybody, it's Kai from the Techno Funk Boy. So, a little bit of a different topic today, but I don't necessarily want this channel to be limited strictly to the video game aspect of gaming. I've actually I guess the last year or so very much increased my tabletop role playing game activities from where it was sitting for many years at zero to now actually being part of a couple of different games that have been a lot of fun. But for those who listen to the Retro Zoo Super Show, we kind of do the same thing. That we do somewhat somewhat frequently getting into like tabletop role playing games and that sort of thing. And this is something that we're very interested in. But I'm doing this thing that this isn't unique to me, and I certainly don't have all the answers yet, but it's a fun project and one that I'm learning a lot through, and that is we just started a group and we just started creating characters for a campaign where we're taking the old Dragonlance modules and porting them over into fifth edition. And when I first started this, I was like, well, I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some, quite a bit of converting, but let's actually think about how much it was going to be. And I kind of decided that it was not going to be nearly as intensive as I initially thought. It was like most of the enemies have fifth edition versions. And so we might need to, change the difficulty up a little bit, depending on how they've been scaled over the years. But it would really just come down to like the very specifics, things that are very specific to Dragonlance. And then I found like even some of the Dragonlance specific monsters have homebrew versions all over the internet. So if you don't know, Dragonlance was originally a first edition campaign, the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I did think they did some updating for second edition, and then they, as I understand it, and this is the version I have not read at all. Margaret Weis's company, and if you know Dragonlance, you know Margaret Weiss. Margaret Weiss co-wrote the novels, which were fantastic. You should read them. And her company got a license to do Dragonlance for third edition, and that did eventually, run out, which is a shame because I would have loved, them to keep that going, but so I've never played it before, and so I decided it's like, well, okay, we're gonna, we'll do this thing, and I decided, like, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. And especially like going into character creation, which is the first step. It's like, okay, so there's no true clerics. So how do we work around that? Because one thing I don't want to do, and this is something the book does. The book, it has pre-generated characters, and they are the characters from the novel. And so they have this workaround for the cleric in that, you have Gold Moon there, and you just follow the text, what the text says. And, there's a mechanic in the game where the healing initially is done in another method. And I don't want to say too much because my players have not read the books or played these games before, and so I don't want to give too much away. But still, if you know the story, you know what I'm talking about. And so that's kind of a way they got around the spells. Well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do pre-generated characters. For half of our group, this is they're very new to the game, and I want them to have the full experience of being able to create characters and all of that. And so I was like, well, okay, no, we'll just what I'll just encourage them is if somebody wants to do a cleric, let's start off as a fighter or something. And that's another thing is I'm going to be starting them at level 1. We'll get into that in a different video because the Dragonlance campaign starts on level 3. But again, new players, I want them to have the experience. I don't want to throw 3 levels worth of mechanics at them. I want them to experience the whole thing, and so we'll get to that in another video. But and so I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, we'll just kind of multi-class them later, or if they're just really determined, if they want to play a cleric at the beginning, then you know, we'll we'll create some kind of mechanic that that they have a bunch of potions or something like that. None of the characters did pick that, and so that was just kind of a thought experiment that we started down, but we didn't really get very far in. Um, but then other people started bringing up, was like, well, what about paladins? And I'm like, oh my goodness, what about paladins? That's a fantastic question. And so I started digging into more Dragonlance stuff, and found out that this is like stuff that I should have got dug into like ages ago to prepare for this game, because character creation turned out to be like a little bit more complicated than I was expecting it to. Um, and it was mostly through like questions that like people were like like really bringing up these issues, and like, oh my goodness, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. Let's dig in. And so the paladin question caused me to go get the old Dragonlance Adventures book, which is kind of like a source book for the Dragonlance, and I'm picking through it, and I was like, oh goodness, there's a lot of really deep stuff in here. Like, I knew that the wizards had robes based on their alignment, and I knew that they were drawing magic from one of the moons based on that alignment and that color. I did not know they had different level paths, and they do. And it's like, oh wow, okay, so this is a lot. This this harkens back to an age where, when they started making this world, it wasn't simply another setting for Dungeons and Dragons. It was, it was essentially a new system placed on the base rules of Dungeons and Dragons. Um, and so this is the sort of stuff that I just found was like fascinating about this. The way the Knights of Solamnia like advance and their different orders, it was way more detailed and way cooler than I expected. And having only really touched the surface of Dungeons and Dragons during the second edition age, I completely missed first edition, but I played a little bit of second edition. This is the kind of detail that I completely missed. And and I think it's a shame, because I find it fascinating, and I had more time in my childhood to actually dig into the details of this than I do now. Right now, it's like, wow, this is awesome. I have a job. I have kids. What have I gotten myself into? And so in Kryn, there are special rules for paladins, and they don't work the same way. And you go through, and like there's a list of acceptable classes in Kryn, and a lot of them have little stars by them, that they don't work the same way exactly as they do in normal Dungeons and Dragons. I think this stuff is just absolutely fantastic. One of the cool things that we haven't even gotten to yet is how the rotation of the moons affect wizards. It is a very, very cool way, but we haven't even gotten there yet. And so like we wade through all of this, and a lot of it we're just not going to be using. I mean, we do want to make this a 5th edition game. We don't want to be playing a 1st edition game with a 5th edition veneer. And so, I do want to use the things that make 5th edition in it. And so that, it's kind of, part of that is like, oh, this is really cool to note. It's just not going to it's just not going to really fly. But then we start getting into other stuff, like they're picking their languages, and somebody picks Orc, and they ask me, it's like, hey, is there anything we should be picking? Like, really, like, should be picking? And I'm like, because it is a new, generally a new game. I'm like, well, you know, it is called Dragonlance. Now, of course, dragons are myths, so you won't have to worry about speaking Draconic. But it's called Dragonlance, and and I don't, I started going into, like, I started pulling up documents. It's like, well, what kind of languages are there? And the language set is different, and it works much more like language here on Earth works, where there's not like a human language and an elfish language. That particular cultures have language. Um, it's one of those cool things that we just really don't have the capacity to do in our game. And so it's one of those cool things, like, oh, that's really neat to note. But getting back to the orc thing, I'm sitting there, I'm racking my brain thinking of the books. I'm like, I don't remember an orc being in there. And so starting searching the internet, and other people are like asking the same question, because, like, the one thing I found in here, and there's, if this is something that you're interested in doing, I mean, by all means, like, the thing that's helped me get in touch with Kryn a lot more is that Dragonlance Adventures book that Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss wrote, and it's fantastic. It's great. But there's been a lot of people who have gone down this road, and they have a lot of really great resources. Like I said, like the Dragonlance specific monsters that don't appear in the monster manual in 5th edition. There, people have homebrewed these things up for us already, and so that's really, really helpful, and it's really, really cool. Um, but I started looking, and people are asking the same question. They're orcs, and the conclusion that we're kind of all all coming to is, I don't think so. I'm gonna pull it up right now. I probably should have done this before. We're gonna do whole world only. Yeah, and so, like, pulling up the PDF of Dragonlance Adventures, and there's no notation of orcs, and so I went back to friend. It's like, without having to pick through like all the modules. It's like, you might want to change that. I don't think there's orcs. Um, you know, and so then they were like, well, okay, well, what are there? And I also don't want to give that too much of that away, because a lot of the plot, if you know this game, if you know this story, a lot of the plot is like this incursion of a new type of enemy. So I don't want to give a lot of that away, but at the same time, I can. It's like, well, there's definitely goblins, so there's goblins. The specific question that what one of the players has is like, if there's no orcs, what are we fighting at first level? It's like, well, I didn't have the heart to tell him right away that, well, there's no first level in this game, but we're gonna make one. But yeah, there there are some enemies that we can fight. But these questions keep coming up, and I'm just having an absolute blast figuring out the answer to them. And that's kind of what's prompting this, is that I'm actually having a lot of fun um, in this process. At first I was intimidated by it because I thought it was going to be very, very intense. And then I convinced myself that no, it would actually be pretty easy. And now it's coming back to the point. It's like, well, actually there are some parts that are really intense, and it's forcing me to step up my game as the dungeon master to really learn what's going on and what we need to do. And so that's something that I'm really excited about, and excited to keep going. for. And so we'll be updating you on this channel and in that process more as long along with some the other content that we're having. Again, if you're new here, we're trying to I'm trying to get the videos up at least twice a week, definitely on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so please hit subscribe, hit like down below. If you hit the bell icon, then it will let you know when I upload a new video. And please share it with friends. So I really do appreciate it. I'm very excited about this process, and so I think that's coming across. But I'm anxious to tell y'all more about how it works out. So with that, we'll talk to you later.